If you're anything like me, you usually leave your hero models until the end of the army, because after weeks of painting, you finally have all those colours down. But after all that, I've decided to go with a little bit more of a different colour for the Lord Veritant, and I'm going to be doing him in gold armour. I have painted the Lord Terminus before this, but I had painted him almost identical to the Liberators, because I wanted him to fit in more with the rank and file guys, so I didn't want to do this with the Lord Veritant. After giving him a spray of Halford's Great Primer, I started off by giving him gold armour with Liberator Gold. I also painted on the handles of his weapons and the shield on the back. This difference is going to make him stand out much more on the battlefield. The Liberator Gold goes on pretty smoothly and can be done with just one coat, but I always add a small bit of lamine medium to my paints to help it go on. But I still had to stick with the colours of Fair Fabric, so for his cloak and weapon handles I went with Caldor Sky. It's a slightly darker colour, so 2 thin coats should do the job. I had to find somewhere on him to paint white, and the robes from his waist were the perfect place, and it's just enough of an area so it won't be dominating all the other colours. I put down 2 to 3 thin layers of red bone until it's on properly. I also painted his left shoulder pad with the same colour to make it look more like bone later on. I didn't want the whole model to be just gold, so I broke it up a bit with lead belcher on the chainmail, the knee pad, the collar, his right shoulder pad, and on the chains holding on the shield on his back. There are 3 parts that I wanted to be leather, so I used Doombull Brown as the base coat on his blindfold, his belt, and on the sword scabbard. I didn't know what the sword holder thing was called, so I had to Google that one. The final base coat down is Pallid Witch Flesh on his bald head. With all the base colours dry, I made a start on shading the gold. My usual go-to for gold is Retributor Armour with Reichland Flesh shade over it, but it was close to turning it into a bronze colour, so this time with the lighter Liberator underneath, it should be a lot brighter looking. For the blue, silver and leather parts, Nuln Oil was used, and I made sure not to let the shade pool up in the cape's recesses. Make sure to give it a good even spread. I have painted a lot of white lately, so I really think I've hit the sweet spot getting it shaded. I use a mixture roughly of 90% lamine medium and 10% Fenrisian grey. It's a grey that's almost an ethereal shade that I like the look of. I've always messed up when painting skin tones somehow, so I've drilled into my head to keep the skin simple. So with Pallid Witch Flesh as the base colour, I use Reichland Flesh shade to bring it to life. The final shade down is the left shoulder pad, and I mentioned earlier that I wanted it to be bone colour, so there's no other better shade than Skeleton Horde. Before I get to the highlighting, I'm going to switch over to the Gryph-hound, which I almost forgot he had. I knew what colour I wanted it to be straight away, because I have 2 dogs, Coco and Banjo, and I'm going to be basing it on Coco's brown fur. Sorry Banjo, maybe next time. I started off by basing the body with XV88. For the feathers, I wanted a similar colour but darker, so I made a mix of XV88 and Abaddon Black, but it was darker than I wanted it to be, so I added a little bit of white scar to brighten it up slightly. For the beak and the claws, I used Balor Brown. I give the whole model a shade with Agrax Earthshade and then dry brush Balor Brown on it. With Balor Brown still being on the wet palette, I highlight the edges of the beaks and the claws, and then I use a thin brush and lightly add single strokes to give the look of fur on the Gryph-hound. We're coming up to the finishing touches of the model, and don't worry, I haven't forgotten about the staff and the sword, but I started off the highlights with Stormhost Silver. This is going to cover a lot on this guy, like all the silver and the gold parts. There are 2 ways to edge highlight. The first is to angle your brush and use the sides along the edges, and this is probably the best way, but sometimes you can't do that because you can't get the right angle on your brush or it's a tight squeeze somewhere. So the other way is to paint straight along the edge. This is trickier and you need a steady hand and practice to get it right. I then go back to Pallid Witch Flesh to highlight the edges of the white robe. For his cape, I used Calgar blue just along the edges to make it pop out. The leather was a little tricky to paint because the parts were so small, but I kept my brush steady as possible and used scrag brown on the edges. The final highlight then was on the skull shoulder pad. I kept the palette witch flesh and painted over all the raised areas. Okay, there's a big part of the model that I haven't started yet, and this is the sword and the staff. I wanted to give them both a magical look, so I started off with 2 thin layers of Temple Guard blue. When it's thinned down with lamb medium, it can become a bit transparent, so do a 3rd layer if needed. When dry, I started layering parts of the blade with an 80-20 mixture of lamb medium and Thousand Suns blue. You want to add as little as possible at first, and then build it up as it blends into the Temple Guard blue. Next then is another glaze of 80-10-10 mix of lamb medium, Thousand Suns blue and Cantor blue added in. This is for the darker parts, and like the last step, just gradually layer it up. For the flames, I use this mixture as a shade and use it all over it. I then use an 80-20 mix of Temple Guard blue and Corax white to highlight the blade's edges and the edges of the flames. The final touch then is a 50-50 mix of Temple Guard blue and white scar to highlight the very edges of the flames, giving them an ethereal look. With this step finished, the magical aura of the sword and staff is complete, bringing an electrifying sense of life to the model. The Lord Veritant and his Gryph Crow are now ready for the tabletop. Even though the Lord Veritant has quite a few different parts on him, he's not the hardest hero model to paint. I quickly put together a small pier for his base, just to make sure he's easily seen across the battlefield. And with him finished, there's only one model left to paint. In the final Scaventide video, I will be painting up the army's general, the Lord Vigilant and his Gryph Stalker. But if you guys like this video, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't, leave a comment below, and thanks for watching.